Hello, this is Unexplained America, and I'm your host, Lisa. And this week is part 1 of The Confession Killer, The Life and Crimes of Henry Lee Lucas. So again, this will be a part 2. This is part 1. We are going to do a deep dive into this case. Now, little business, please leave me a comment. Go follow me on the social medias. You can check me out at unexplainedamerica.com. You can also, I've got my Patreon and merchandise and all the things. But definitely subscribe, follow me wherever you listen, and leave a comment because that really helps and I appreciate it. In this episode, again, we are discussing the life and crimes of Henry Lee Lucas, the Confession Killer. Now, listener discretion advised. These crimes are heinous. There is mention of assault, sexual related rape, crimes against children, you name it, he did it. So, or discussed it. Now, again, this is part 1. This will be a very deep dive and a very extensive 2-part series. Now, a little preface here. This research is based on Henry Lee Lucas's own account. However, I have looked in as much legal documentation to try to get certain details as factual as possible, but there is zero way to know what Lucas truly did, how many crimes he truly committed and such, and just the way it happened. So just note that you'll be able to kind of see for yourself and get your own perspective on Lucas's account. Now, for me, Lucas's account of certain things seems very embellished, if not just outright lies, okay? But, again, he's the only person that knows. So, you'll get to choose for yourself. So, in 1983, Lucas is arrested for having an illegal firearm as a felon. Now, after this time frame, Lucas at first confesses to killing 40 women. Then he will increase the figure to 100 and eventually land up to 600 confessions of different murders and crimes. Again, what is the truth? That is only known to Henry, maybe, known to God, yes. I truly do not believe maybe even Henry Lee Lucas even fully knows what all he did, what he didn't do. You're going to be able to see what you think. Now, you know me, I'm going to start at the beginning and the beginning of Henry Lee Lucas's life. So in Blacksburg, Virginia, on Sunday, August 23rd, 1936, Henry Lee Lucas is born to Nellie Viola Dixon Lucas. She goes by Nellie. Now, Nellie was 48 years old at the time that Henry is born. She is married to 35-year-old Anderson Lucas, nicknamed No Legs, as he was a double amputee that had lost his legs in a horrible train accident while working. Now, this was Anderson's second child with Nellie. They had had their first son in 1933, named Andrew. However, Nellie had a whole other family that she abandoned prior to marrying Anderson. She had been married to a man named Warden Elmer Woe. I think it's Woe or Waugh. The spelling is W-A-U-G-H. And they had married in 1910 and had 7 children. Yes, 7 children together. Their firstborn was 1914, and then the last child born to her and Warden was 1926. And they had 4 girls and 3 boys. Now, the Lucas were said to be very poor. They lived in a small log home or a small wood frame home, depending on the source. It said that Nellie was extremely upset when Henry was born, that she had wanted a girl, and since she already had Andrew, and she also already had plenty of girl clothing from her previous girls that she had raised before. And Nellie was said to be a sex worker. She was the breadwinner of the family, and that having a girl would make like her sex work better, quote unquote, men paying more money for her and a daughter. So from the time that Henry could remember his mother, he remembers actually being raised and treated and dressed like a little girl. She didn't cut his hair or anything. She just allowed him to have long ringlets, and she would call him Henrietta. The Lucas home was said to be very violent. Nellie was a dominating woman. She would beat both Andrew and Henry. She would also beat Anderson. She would belittle him. Anderson work consisted of selling pencils and moonshine that he produced. However, he was known to be drinking more of the moonshine than what he sold. But those were his means of making money, and then hers was the sex work. On top of the regular beatings Nellie would supply across the board, she would also engage in her sex work there in the home. She would force the children to witness, assist in her work, and during this time, Henry was between the ages of 1 and 6. And Henry would later state, "I hated all my life. I hated everybody. I was treated like what I call the dog of the family. I was beaten. I was made to do things that no human being would want to do." Now, Nellie did not give the boys any money. She barely clothed them. They never had shoes or toys. They were never shown any kindness or affection. Nellie would tell Henry that Lucas was not his real father, but only his stepfather. She stated his real father was one of her clients. Henry never knew his real father, only saw him once on the street as his mother pointed him out and said, "There's your worthless daddy." In the home, Anderson would be called daddy by both boys and considered their father. Now, another person living in the home to help Nellie terrorize the boys and Anderson was a boyfriend, or what Lucas called her pimp. This person would beat Anderson and Andrew and Henry. He lived in the home. Henry Lee Lucas's book calls this person Rudy, but names were changed in the book. However, in the 1950 census, there is a lodger living with Nellie, Anderson, and Henry, and his name is Bernie Dowdy. Now, I don't know if this person is the same quote-unquote Rudy. More than likely is the same. Now, in the fall of 1942, Henry went to first grade. Nellie sent him to school as Henrietta. He was wearing dresses. He had the long hair. She sent him as a girl. Now, the teacher figures out Henry is a boy, and the school gets involved. They get a court order against Nellie to require her to dress and treat Henry as a boy. The teacher was also the first person in Henry's life to be kind, and she gave him his first set of boy clothes. So not only did they have to get a court order to get this done, but they also had to actually clothe Henry. Now, again, both Andrew and Henry were extremely mistreated. The boys were sent to school without shoes. They weren't given like lunches. The teachers would share their food with them. Henry recalls one time when he and Andrew were walking home from school, a kind man stopped and picked the boys up to give them a ride. It was said to be freezing outside, snow on the ground, and the boys had no shoes on. They never had shoes. The man took the boys and bought them sneakers and 2 pairs of gray socks, then dropped them off at home. Now, Nellie beat the boys and was so angry, so she never wanted or allowed the boys to take things from strangers, and if they were given money, she wanted to take it for herself. Fortunately, these shoes didn't fit her or this Bernie character, so the boys were actually allowed to keep the shoes. Now, Henry states 2 weeks after this happened, the man came back to the house and asked if he could adopt Henry, but Nellie just angrily ran him off. So, yes, this is hard to even, you guys are with me. Yeah, this is hard to even recount and imagine. This is terrible. So, in the summer of 1943, Andrew and Henry were playing, and Andrew accidentally cut Henry on his face, like very close to his eye. Nellie didn't get any medical treatment for the cut, nor treat the cut herself, and the cut became infected. And it was very painful for Henry, and only when he actually went to school in the fall did the teachers notice and get Henry medication for the wound, and cleaned the wound up. Now, the wound had damaged Henry's eye, but it didn't fully damage it until there was an incident at school when he was like in second or third grade when a teacher went to swat another student with a ruler and accidentally caught Henry in his left eye. The school sent him to the hospital, but the damage was done. Henry had to get the eye removed and they replaced with a fake eye. And it said this teacher was so upset she quit teaching altogether. It had truly been an accident on her part. Henry, due to his situation at home, just the lack of support, he fell way behind in school. He was not doing well in school at all. His teachers had to purchase him special lesson books to try to help him along. He does complete the 4th grade, but then the school couldn't afford the special materials for Henry, and so he just couldn't keep up. So Nellie kept him home after the 4th grade and turns him into just her worker in the home. She makes him do all the home chores, the cleaning, the cooking, repairing the home, anything and everything that she needed, including helping her manage her clients, getting them drinks and food, again, witnessing these sex acts in the home, and just anything and everything under the sun was going on there. And she continued to beat and belittle him along with Anderson, whom he was also helping. So he would help Anderson with the moonshine work and just whatever in the house for both Nellie and Anderson and what they needed. Now, by the time Henry is 14, so Andrew had already escaped the home by joining the Navy. Like, he had fudged his age and he got into the Navy, and he is 3 years older than Henry. Now, Henry had tried to do the same thing. He just wanted out of the home, and he tried the Navy, and then he tried the Army, and basically they didn't believe him about his age because he was lying about his age to try to get out, but they wouldn't take him because of his eye. Anderson had pretty much been sick for most of 1951 in this same time period, and by October 24th of 51, Anderson dies, and his death certificate lists as pneumonia with influenza. It also listed he was never put in hospital or under doctor's care. So basically, he died in the home under zero medical care. Left with his mother, his monster of a mother, and her pimp, Henry decides he's had enough. He leaves the home and just kind of, he says, lives on his own for about 6 weeks. He's sleeping wherever he could find a space, like in crawl spaces of other homes. He's stealing food, just kind of living feral and off of whatever he can get his hands on. Now, he does know how to drive because Anderson had needed his help with delivering the moonshine and such. So he steals a pickup truck and he goes to Maryland. In Maryland, he is caught. He is arrested. Now, he's sentenced to 5 years because he's a juvenile. He said that they put him on a state boys working farm. Now, he initially likes the farm. He has food. He has clothing. But after 2 years, he says he and another boy run away from the farm. They steal clothes. They jump a train to West Virginia. And there they are stopped by a policeman who questions them, then arrests them, and then he's actually placed in a Virginia state prison. Henry says that he escapes that prison and he heads to Michigan where his older half-sister lives. Now, he is arrested in Michigan for breaking and entering, and he is put in jail for 14 months. Now, after which they return him to Virginia, and upon his release in Virginia, Henry goes back to his half-sister's home in Tecumseh, Michigan. This would be around 1959, okay? So he's done several stints between this time, and he was 14 when he first had left home. By this time, he's about 23. In Michigan, he meets a girl he wants to marry. Now, his sister, her name is Opal, she has Nellie come up to visit in January of 1960. And by now, Nellie is 74 years old. She's not evidently doing her sex work or anything. Now, according to Henry, he and Nellie and his girl, and her name is Stella, they all go out for the evening drinking in a bar. And he states his mother gets really belligerent. She begins harassing Stella. She states that he cannot marry Stella, that he needs to go back to Virginia with her and take care of her. And this begins a whole fight, and Stella leaves Henry. Then at home, Henry is heartbroken about losing Stella. Him and his mother get into a huge fight, and he goes to swing at her with a knife after he said that she had hit him with a broomstick or whatever. Now, he says he kind of swings at her, kind of cuts her a little. He does see her fall to the ground, and then he just leaves. He just leaves her there. He says he steals a car. He drives down to Virginia thinking that she will join him. So that's where she had wanted him to go. That's where he drives to. And that's where he says he waits on his mother. Now, when she doesn't show up, he steals another car and decides to go back to Michigan to kind of see what's up with her. Well, this car, he says, breaks down in Ohio, and then he just starts walking, like he's going to walk to Michigan. While he's hitchhiking, walking, he is picked up by police, and then they realize who he is, and he is arrested. But again, that was his perspective on that. And he is arrested, okay? This information is straight from actual newspaper accounts and such. Now, on Tuesday, January 12th, 1960, Mrs. Opal Jennings, which is Henry's half-sister, so Opal goes to the duplex, and basically they had been, like, Opal and her husband have a farm outside of town, but they own this duplex, and basically her mom was staying there. Henry was staying with the mom. It was closer to the bus station and such, and evidently her mom had been visiting since Christmas time, since the holidays. Now, Opal goes into the home. She does find her mother laying down in the upstairs bedroom. She is fully clothed. She is clearly not doing well. She calls for an ambulance and finds that her mother, has died. So the police immediately, she's telling the police about her brother, and they're piecing together. He had just gotten out of the Virginia State Penitentiary. He had actually come to Opal in September of 59, had been there, that he had refused to work and such, and that she states that he and her mother had fought quite a bit about him working and not, and about if he would stay in Michigan or not. And so she stated that she's giving the police all this information and they can't find him. And so this is Tuesday, and then they immediately put out all these bulletins to all these states looking for him. So he is suspected. It is in the newspapers. They're putting out his picture. They're putting all this information out about him and that he is the suspect. So he is very much wanted for the murder of his mother. He is picked up hitchhiking. They figure out who he is. Like, he was honest about who he is. He tells the officer his name, and then the officer's like, well, you're suspected in killing your mom. And then Henry says that he didn't believe that he had killed her. He didn't know that she was dead. He just says that he had cut her and that he had just left, and that they had fought about where they would live in Michigan or Virginia. This all happens on January 17th that Henry is picked up. He is picked up again in Ohio. He is extradited to Michigan, and then by March, he is put on trial for his mother's death. The prosecution calls 11 witnesses, one of which is a Dr. Ronheim. He states the wound to Nellie was inflicted by a downward thrust which pierced a major artery in her neck. He listed this as the cause of death and said the blade that hit the artery would have to be at least 2.5 inches long. Nellie also had 3 small superficial bruises on her neck as well. They had found after he murdered his mother that he did steal all the money that had been on her, and that there was little to no evidence of any other violent struggle in the room whenever she was found. So the doctor, he did testify. Now, the jury, after hearing all of the evidence, They deliberate for 46 minutes. And on March 24th of 1960, they find Henry guilty on second-degree murder charge. He is sentenced to 40 years in prison. Now, in prison, at first, he was not thrilled. He was not cooperating. After he settled in, even though he had a very limited education, he enrolled in university-level courses, so he began coursework. He does complete all of his courses. He gets certified in automobile mechanics and electrical work. And really, he appears to be a model prisoner from that perspective. Like, he never got in trouble. He did his coursework. He just did what he was told. Now, in 1970, so after 10 years in prison, due to overcrowding of the prison, the parole board meets with Henry, and they were very impressed with his completion of his courses and that he would be easily able to find work with automobiles or in the electrical field. Now, they review this file, they meet with him, and they state to him that they see that he did cut his mother, but that she evidently, according to him, had a heart attack as well. And that basically from the attack that she had a heart attack. They do ask him if he would kill again upon his release, and Henry states, yes, and I will kill again. And he states that the parole board just takes that as a joke. They just kind of laugh it off, and they end up granting him parole. At the time, in the state of Michigan, a convict was costing the state $18,000 a year for just one prisoner. And again, the additional reasoning to back up his getting parole or being up for at all was just overcrowding in the prison. So it came down to money and overcrowding. During this time in prison, some sources say Lucas does try to commit suicide. He tried to slash his wrist, and he tried cutting his stomach. He spent some time in their state hospital receiving psychiatric treatments, but he does not actually relate any of this himself. Okay, so this is just from other sources. Now, in June of 1970, Henry is out of prison. He is a felon. He is on parole. He's supposed to do certain things with that. There are parameters and rules. He's supposed to check in with his parole officer, and he does that for a few months before skipping out on the probation altogether. He clearly cannot keep out of trouble. It's said that he tries to kidnap 2 teenage girls in Michigan, a girl named Leslie Warren and a Marcy Goodwin. He is put back in prison for 4 years. He then paroles again. So this is 70 to 74. Remember that, okay? Now he paroles out again, and he says that he goes to Maryland where he has another half-sister living. And there is a second cousin there that had been writing to him, and her name is Betty Crawford. Now, they connect, and they hit it off, and they end up getting married. According to Henry, he's working 2 jobs to provide for Betty and her 15 family members that evidently live with them. And he says Becky wasn't necessarily mean to him or ugly. She just didn't do anything. She was just lazy. He had to do everything for her. On top of working 2 jobs just to support the family, he also was required to do the housework, the cooking, just everything in the house. Now, after a year or so, he packs up and leaves. Now, a different account states that she asked him to leave because he was molesting one of her daughters from a previous marriage. By this time, it's around 1976, Henry goes to Florida and he meets up with a man named Otis Toole. Now, Henry states he had actually met Otis while working in Pennsylvania when he was married actually to Betty during that time, and he was working at a mushroom farm. He says that he met Otis during that time. Now, he states Otis had a sexual preference for men, which Henry wasn't into, but it didn't bother him, and that he and Otis began hanging out. They became good friends. They also began robbing people all over Delaware and Pennsylvania, according to Henry. Then they decided to up their antics and compete with each other in their crime pursuits. and they completely quit working on the farm. They just traveled around robbing people, raping people, murdering people, and committing these acts in Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, Wisconsin. Henry states they do go into Toronto for one murder, and then they head south to Georgia. They go to Texas, Louisiana, New Mexico. They're committing two murders. He states that they commit two murders for hire via connections that Otis has. So these were things that Otis put together, and that he did two murders for hire. After 6 months of this, so sometime he's saying in 1976, Otis tells Henry he has some business in Florida. And Otis does have family around the Springfield, Florida area, which is in the northern Florida area near Panama City. Now they decide, because of all their killings, that they need to part ways for a bit to kind of throw off authorities. So Henry decides to go back to Maryland for a bit. He has zero issues working. He does have his mechanical skills, he says, and he is living with his half-sister in Maryland. Now, he lives with her family for around a year, and then she accuses him of sexually assaulting her 8-year-old daughter. Now, looking at this sister's age and such, he does have one sister in this area named Almeda. Now, she wouldn't have had a daughter that age to line up with Henry's story. Her daughter would have probably been in her 30s at this time. But perhaps she had a granddaughter, or perhaps Henry was confusing this period of time with the period of time around Betty. I don't know. But his book really doesn't have a lot of confirmed dates and names hardly, so it's really hard to follow like a time frame here. He refutes this happened at all. And about the daughter, he refutes that he molested her or anything, and he just thinks his sister is tired of him living there, wants him to move on. So he says that he moves on to Orlando, Florida, where Otis is during that time. He connects with Otis's family. He is hanging out with the family and Otis. He says he's continuously traveling, robbing, and committing heinous acts during this time. Now, this is probably getting us to around 1978. He states Otis and him meet up with a man named Don Metairie, who is from Shreveport, Louisiana. And he states Don offers to pay them $1,000 to transport some cars. Henry goes along with Don. He goes to Shreveport and then finds out these vehicles are stolen and that the cars are like they're stolen, and then Don wants the cars driven down to Mexico. This guy is supplying alias and papers and all this. Well, Henry refuses because he states car theft is a big felony and he's gotten in too much trouble before, and the prison sentence for him would be 30 years because of his record. So he declines based on he will never, quote unquote, steal cars again, because that's what got him caught for the murder of his mother and such, and other issues in the past. This Don, he tells him, well, if you don't want to transport cars, then I can find you work making anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 for murder for hire jobs. Just come find him in Miami if he decides to do this, but he would have to enter this organization of devil worshippers called the Hand of Death. So Henry listens to Don, but he decides that he doesn't want to do this at this time. So he states that he goes back to Florida to connect with Otis and his family. And then Henry discusses becoming close to Otis's niece, a girl named Becky, and he's discussing this, how much he likes her. He treats her and her brother well. And again, this time frame was around 1978, and Becky would be a 10-year-old girl, by the way. He's not relaying actual ages in his book. Henry says by October of 1978, he's changed his mind. He decides that he's going to look for Dawn and that he does want to join this organization and do the murder for hire jobs or whatever. he's going to join this hand of death. And Otis, he never mentions Otis saying anything about this, but then Otis decides to drive Henry to Miami and be with him. And then during this drive, Otis outlines that he already knew about this. He had a relationship with this Don guy. He was already in this organization. So he was the one that kind of set this up, quote unquote, with this Don. Now they drive to meet Don in Miami. They go to this warehouse. Don gives them instructions, and Otis takes Henry to meet this group, this hand of death group in the Florida Everglades. And it's very private, secluded, secret. They have to take like an airboat, and then they meet up once they get deep into the Everglades. They meet up with a very older man who is said to be Satan's priest, according to Don. So Don's there with them, evidently Otis, and then they're meeting this hand of death, this Satan's priest. And so that's his quote unquote name, the hand of death. There, Henry spends 6 to 8 weeks in this camp situation. The first night, he is told that he is in hut number 10, but in order to actually join and get into the camp in the first place, he has a first assignment, and that is to kill a man in hut 9. And he is told this man isn't doing what he's supposed to do. I guess he's getting drunk or whatever, and that he will be drunk when he finds him in hut 9. Henry and Otis, they go to hut 9. They get this man out of the hut. They take him to the beach, and then Henry kills him with a knife. Now, he says he takes the man's bloody garments back to the group to kind of prove what he did, and then evidently the man's body is taken, and they have like a whole ceremony. So this is just a whole group of Satan worshipers, devil worshipers. Yes. So the hand, or Satan's high priest, the older man, he cuts out this man's heart. Then the group of people, Henry says, mainly women, feed the man 2 members. So they're actually cannibalists. And he said that Otis had been into this before. He knew he was into cannibalism. So they eat this man, they drink his blood, and they have a large orgy at the altar. And then afterwards, they actually burn the rest of the man's remains. Now, Henry's saying that this camp has about 200 people there. They're all taking classes, that they're coming to him because he's very good with a knife and knife work. So they're actually telling him that he gets to teach a course on knives, but then he needs to stay in line because he has to learn the other stuff. So they're teaching all kinds of killing methods. They teach how this is all done in Satan's name. All the sins are good. All the sins are encouraged. They're drinking. There are a lot of drugs supplied, but you are not allowed to drink and do the drugs when you're in training or on a mission. Otis tells Henry he's been through it already. Again, he's already been through it. And that the camp is always moved. It can easily be moved within 1 day. There were no electronics, but there was like one radio at the camps, and all the huts were hidden in the trees from any aerial viewing and such. Now, the people are required to speak English, but there were people from all over the world, all the countries. Henry is, saying again, he was especially chosen because of his experience in killing, his experience with a knife, that they had handpicked him for this organization, so to speak. And again, he's teaching these courses just in the knife division or whatever. But he's told, don't let this go to your head. You're just a student and you need to learn everything else. So, and again, they're teaching them about poisons, about gun use, like any murder weapons, period. And so Henry goes on to express that all sexual deviant behaviors are encouraged within this organization. Sadomasochism, sodomy, bondage, necrophilia, zoophilia, anything and everything goes and was happening at this camp. And he said that they would have these black masses. There would be the cannibalism, which he stated he did not get involved in, that wasn't what he did. He said that they would bring in children and teens and adults that were kidnapped and brought in for these ceremonies for the whole organization to rape and kill and cannibalize on altars. So this was happening over and over. Biggest lesson, he said, at the camp, and that's something that they preached over and over again from start to finish, was never leave a witness. You must kill or be killed, and anyone in the hand could be killed at any time for any reason, and the only way out of the organization was to be killed. So this was kill or be killed. Now, after 7 weeks, Henry said he was done. He had completed the training. He would meet with Dawn and the hand and get his first assignment. Now, Otis is with him this whole time, according to Henry. Their first assignment was to steal babies and children and take them to a ranch that the group had in Mexico. And then there, the babies were sold. They could get a lot of money for the babies. If the kids were 4 to 10 years old, they were used and sold for other services, sexual or whatever deviant services. Teens were actually put into camps to be trained or used as slaves or workers or whatever. They just took the teenagers. Now, they really needed babies, so the hand gave them a Pontiac station wagon and told them to steal babies. So they took one baby girl, allegedly in Houston. They delivered her via a route into Mexico through El Paso. And when they arrived at this ranch owned by the hand, it was a real working ranch with animals and such. Henry said it was a 2-story adobe style with a red tiled roof. Kind of over the next year, they sold kids, he said, of all ages. They stole these kids from parked cars, nurseries, shopping centers, schoolyards. They would drug them to keep them quiet and docile just so they could get them to Mexico. They didn't want to deal with the kids, quote unquote. Henry said sometimes the kids overdose, like they gave them too much drugs, and they just dump them somewhere if they died. They never take more than 2 kids at a time from any given area or town. And after a year, Otis and Henry told Dawn they were burnt out. They kind of wanted to take a break, quote unquote, from this. So, according to Henry, Otis is sent to Miami, and then he tells Henry to go back to Orlando to just lay low for a while. So they do this, and during this time, so Henry's hanging out in Orlando with Otis's family and becoming even closer to Becky. And she's probably, again, only maybe 11, 12 at this time. And he is treating her and looking at her like a woman, like someone he wants to be with. So after a short time, Dawn gives Henry a car and tells him he has a murder for hire job in Texas. And it's a political figure there that he's needing out of the way, but he tells Henry to just hold on for that assignment. Now, before this, Henry goes on a road trip in this car with money that he's stolen or made from working, and he takes just Becky. And he states Becky already knew about the lifestyle of him and Otis, had already witnessed some things that they had done, like she knew that they were murderers or whatever. So he takes her with him, and he does end up killing this person in Texas, he says. And he does state that she had asked if she could watch this murder, and that she did, and that she also helped him bury the man in a shallow grave. Now, after this time period, he has his money from that. He and Becky are traveling. They're staying in motels. He's taking her all over the country. According to him, she's 12. He's saying that he's raping other women and murdering them to kind of keep from assaulting Becky herself, which he states that he doesn't do because she's so young. He's just kind of being with her, treating her like his girlfriend. But he does return Becky back to Florida with her family and tells them that he does plan on marrying Becky, but he's waiting till she gets a little bit older. Now, he reconnects with Otis during this time. He and Otis travel around. They are killing more people for the hand. He states that they kill some people in New Mexico. He states that they break into several homes. They kill, they rape, they steal. And in all these cases, so when they're doing these killings and such, Henry says they are constantly changing the way that they murder these people, that sometimes they would straighten up the house to confuse the police. Sometimes they would steal. Sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes they would have the sexual assault. Sometimes they wouldn't. They would just constantly changing everything about the crime so that they wouldn't have a pattern per se for the police. Now, Henry discusses how he does kill a girl near Austin, Texas. He states he leaves her body in a ditch and that she was wearing green socks. And he always, he says, marks his body or marks the bodies of the people that he kills, but he marks them in different ways each time. He also discussed how he kills a school teacher near Dallas. And then around 1980, he says he rapes and kills a woman in Arkansas. He says he goes back to get Becky after this time has passed. He wants to be with her full time. He wants her with him full time. And he says that he takes her from Florida and that they settle in a community near Bowie, Texas. And it's a church community that they meet. He's actually working for a pastor who has like this church community, but also has a construction company, and they're doing roofs and other just building projects for people for hire. Now, during this time, Henry says he stops using drugs and alcohol, that they're actually living in the church compound. They have an apartment. He's given, a roof over their heads, food. It's just a community and work. He says that he won't even allow for the pastor to pay him for his work. And so the pastor just kind of puts his money aside for him. He does continue to smoke, and his habit is like a 3-pack a day smoking habit. In his telling, he's supposedly also at the same time working with a woman named Kate, who is part of the Hand, he states. Becky gets very close to the women in this church community. She begins learning about the Bible and going to church and all the things. She does get saved, and now by this time, it's around 1982, and she is around 14 or 15 by this time. Church community pretty much thinks her and Henry are married, so they are living as a married couple and such, and according to Henry, Becky has been on his case to become saved. And also she's wanting him to leave or go back to Florida, that she was ready to see her family. And so they do get into an altercation about this. And Henry states that he does kill Becky because she's constantly on him, and they get in this fight and he doesn't want to deal with this. Henry tells the church community he and Becky had a fight. And then Henry says Otis shows up and had come back, which he knew the truth about Becky and didn't care. He plays along and tells the church, oh yeah, she went back to Florida. She's my niece. Otis tells Henry that he'll actually take care of Becky's body for Henry, because Henry had just killed her in a field or whatever. So Otis had promised to bury Becky for Henry. And Henry is very beside himself about killing her. Like, he was very upset with himself over this, according to him. So Otis, who had promised Henry that he would bury Becky, but he decides to actually utilize her in a black mass, and allegedly has a boyfriend along with him to do this. Henry is expressing extreme guilt about how he's feeling. He's crying and crying about killing Becky. He's never been remorseful for killing, but he truly loved Becky. Henry also decides he must kill Kate, the Kate woman that he was working with through the Hand, because Kate knew Becky and would be a witness. So because she's a witness, he has to get rid of her. So he goes to Kate's home. Allegedly, she has business with some people. He states that she's around in her 60s or so. She's an older woman, and he waits for her. And by this time, he is in his upper 40s, by the way. Okay. He waits for her to conduct her business. He goes to her home. He's watching her, and then he goes to her door. He says he lures her out to his car, and then he kills Kate with a knife. he states he stuffs her body in a plastic bag and then into a culvert. He also states that he etches an upside down cross on her chest. So then Otis is there. Otis is telling Henry, hey, you need to get out of here. I will clean up the mess like I did with Becky. And he says he'll burn Kate's house down and then dispose of her body for him. He and his alleged friend or boyfriend. Now, Henry finds out that truly all that Otis did was chop Becky up, and then he tried to bury her, but the ground was too hard, and he didn't really do what he had told Henry he would do. So Henry goes out to the field himself where he had killed Becky and finds that Otis had just left her body parts. He had chopped her up. Otis just expected for animals to take care of the rest. Well, he finds the body parts and then he buries what he could find, what hadn't been drug off by animals. Henry says again he's feeling really terrible, really guilty. He goes to Florida after this, and then he says he goes out to California. In California, he says police become suspicious of him when his car is parked and they see a blood stain in the car. He states Kate's blood was type A and he has blood type O. Well, the police find his car is registered to Montague County, Texas. Then they see where Henry, and they see his record, and they're starting to put pieces together. And the California police tell him that those sheriffs in Texas are suspicious of Henry and for the disappearances of Kate, and especially since Kate's home was torched. So Otis had said he would burn it down, and evidently he did. So her home was torched. Also, Becky, they're wondering about Becky. They're asking questions in Texas. And so the California cops bring Henry in for questioning. Now, they state that they want to get samples of Henry's blood, and then they test the blood in his car as well. Well, according to Henry, they test the samples and they tell him the blood in the car matches his blood type. And so they let him go. Now, according to Henry in his book, the reasoning to this is because Kate's blood was dried and old in the sunlight and it had turned to O, thus matching him. So it went from type A to type O because of the sunlight. I'm not an expert by any means, but this sounded wild. And so according to the internet, sunlight exposure does not change a person's blood type. So I don't know, obviously, what happened. Maybe they allege that perhaps there was mislabeling or failures in the lab on the testing, or really perhaps Henry cut himself when he murdered Kate and his blood was kind of mixed in with the blood in his car. I don't know, but he wasn't arrested at this time, and this was according to him because of that. So, now according to Henry, goes back to Texas, but along the way he kills a young hitchhiker around Louisiana. I don't know why he was in Louisiana from California. Not sure about that, but that's what he says. So, now he's back in Texas. He reconnects with the pastor in the church community, and he does find out that the sheriff, whose name is Conway, is investigating him. And he's looking at Kate's disappearance and Becky's, and he's very suspicious of Henry. So Conway brings Henry in for questioning. They ask if he'll take a polygraph. Now, Henry says during his time in training with the Hand of Death, he trained to remain calm for any type of polygraph testing. Now, the sheriff, who is also working with a Texas Ranger named Phil Ryan and a prosecutor named James Smith in Montague County. Now, they set up a polygraph on Henry in Dallas, and they question him about Kate's disappearance, Becky's disappearance, and this takes place October 18th of 1982. It says that he passes the polygraph, and he goes back to the county, though, for more questioning. Like, they take him back in, they question him longer. They really tell him this point they can't arrest him, but Conway makes it very clear he doesn't believe Henry. And However, he doesn't have evidence, so he has to release him. So he goes to leave the jail at this time, but is leaving the jail. He is arrested for a warrant from the state of Maryland on a parole violation. He's put in a lone, cold cell for this parole violation. They're kind of holding him. They don't give him any cigarettes or coffee. They have AC running in this cell. So he is held and interrogated kind of off and on for 2 weeks. And during this time, he says the pastor visits him. He brings him cigarettes. Finally, the sheriff has to release him. But he does tell Henry he has scheduled another polygraph. This would be for January of 1983. Now, the sheriff, again, is making it clear he thinks Henry is guilty. So Henry is loose. He is working for the pastor still. Kind of a little side note. In January of 1983, Sheriff Conway tries to get another polygraph done on Henry, but the technician comes back saying they won't do it because they found records that Henry was mentally ill and had been in a mental hospital in West Virginia in 1980. Okay, now Henry doesn't mention this. He is released from doing that polygraph. Now, in the book, there's mention of a gun that the pastor, and this is kind of originally, the pastor had found a gun and for some reason had asked Henry to purchase and hide this gun in the community, like in his apartment there in the community. Now, Henry had agreed to help the pastor out by doing this, but he told the pastor, okay, I'm a felon. I'm not supposed to have a gun. Well, one of the ladies at the community had the gun and was hiding it in like a paper sack or whatever. So this gun comes up again when Henry comes back. This is just Henry's telling of the situation, but that he had a gun. It was hidden at the community in a paper sack. In March of 1983, Sheriff Conway finds someone else to do a polygraph. So Henry takes another polygraph in March and allegedly passes this one as well. Now, time goes by, and Henry says by June, so this is June of 1983, he is getting ready to leave the community. He's gotten a car that someone had given him, but by June 11th, Henry sees Sheriff Conway's wife actually out at the church, and then he sees her with the pastor's wife, which her name is Faye, and then he sees them carrying this paper bag, and he assumes it is the gun that was hiding in his apartment or whatever. Now, he is arrested by Conway on a felony warrant related to the gun. He's put in the county jail. Henry says he tries to hang himself, but is cut down. He is sent to a hospital in Bowie, and after he's treated, he's sent to Wichita Falls, Texas, before being transferred back to Sheriff Conway's jail in Montague County. By June 15th, Henry breaks down and says that he sees a light appear in his jail, and he hears the voice of God tell him to follow him. And Henry says, how? And God says, by giving up all the bodies of victims. Henry yells for the jailer. He asks for pen and paper to write a note to the sheriff. He writes a note saying he killed Kate and Becky, but he doesn't sign it. Now, Sheriff Conway sets up a meeting. He gives coffee and cigarettes, and they sit down, and he's witnesses and is recording this and such. Henry confesses to those murders. So Henry is arrested at this time for Becky and Kate's murders. This is where we're going to end this part one. So this is all Henry Lee Lucas's account of everything in his life up to the point of June 1983. And so when we come back into part two, we will be discussing everything that transpires after his arrest and confessions, just the huge aftermath. There is so much there. And then we're going to try to just look at the actual facts of Henry Lee Lucas, and a special surprise for you coming in part two. So stay tuned. Make sure to listen to this episode and be ready for part two, as we're going to get into a lot more details and have maybe a special interviewing, okay, of someone who actually met Henry Lee Lucas, okay. So thank you guys so much for listening. Again, please leave me a comment, a rate, Anything and everything helps, and be ready again for part 2. Bye.
My parents was drunk. Your mother was prostitute. So, talking about that was like talking about a nightmare. Sounded like you had some good memories of childhood. Well, I did with my brother, we played or something like that. We always had a good time. Our lives as we were growing up, it's, I guess you say the way other child or other children grow up was different. Were you abused or just... I was abused. I was pressed as a girl for about 7 years of my life. I did. I had to wear a dress. I had to wear long hair. Treated as a girl.